Welcome to Sleepy Tales, where relaxing stories are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. For more peaceful tales, subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. Now, get comfortable and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. There are many stories about royalty, but few are as strange and as quiet as the tale of a young woman who proved her identity not through bravery, magic, or great deeds, but through a single sleepless night. The story of the princess and the pea may seem delicate, even small, but behind its softness lies something older and deeper, a world shaped by storms, long journeys, and the fragile weight of truth. In this retelling, the world around the princess grows larger, the night grows longer, and the test that decides her fate becomes something more than a curious bed and a hidden seed. This is the story of a kingdom waiting, a prince searching, and a young woman carrying the memory of a life far from comfort, all drawn together by the question of what it truly means to belong. There was once a kingdom known for its calm seasons, its quiet rivers, and the gentle way morning light touched its fields. It was not a land of great battles or grand miracles, and it did not claim to be the center of the world. Instead, it was a place where time moved slowly, where people lived by simple routines, and where peace settled like soft dust on the roads. Yet for all its calm beauty, the kingdom carried a quiet ache, one that most people did not speak of. Their royal family, wise, beloved, and aging, had only one child, a young prince who had grown into adulthood without choosing a bride. Without a princess, there was no promise of an heir, and without an heir, the peace of the land felt fragile, like a candle flickering in still air. The king and queen had ruled for many years, and the people trusted them deeply. But age showed itself in their slower steps, in the moments when the queen paused on the stairs, or when the king rested longer than usual before addressing the court. The kingdom depended on a future that had not yet been secured, and so all hopes rested on the prince. He was gentle in nature, thoughtful in decision, and loyal to his duties, but he carried a heaviness that few understood. From childhood, he had heard the same quiet reminder whispered beneath every celebration, every ceremony, and every blessing, that one day he must choose a true princess to stand beside him. The prince often wondered what true meant. The word was thrown around by elders, advisors, and distant relatives, yet no one seemed able to give a clear answer. Some believed a true princess was born into royalty. Others argued it was about conduct or upbringing. A few said it was something felt rather than proven. But no matter how the word was shaped, it formed a burden that settled on the prince's shoulders as naturally as the cloak he wore. Each sunrise reminded him that time was passing and that everyone was waiting. Though he wished to please his parents and serve his kingdom, the prince did not want to choose someone merely for appearance or formality. He wanted honesty, depth, and a heart that understood his own. But such desires were not always welcomed in royal halls, where decisions were made for stability more than happiness. And so, as the years slipped by, quiet pressure grew into firm expectation. Eventually, the advisors urged the prince to travel beyond the kingdom's borders, to search for a princess whose identity could not be questioned. After long discussions, the prince agreed. If a true princess existed, he would find her, or at least he would try. He set out in early spring, when the rivers swelled and the air carried a scent of thawing earth. The journey began with hope, small but sincere. The prince rode through neighboring lands, each with its own customs and crowns, each offering names and promises. Wherever he arrived, he was welcomed politely, sometimes with grand feasts, sometimes with quiet formalities. Princesses lined halls in colorful gowns, their smiles practiced and perfect. They spoke of court life, of embroidery, of etiquette, of diplomatic matters. Some were kind, some proud, some distant, some eager. But none felt right, not even in the smallest way. The prince listened more than he spoke, observing how each kingdom moved, how the families interacted, how the princesses carried themselves. Yet, the feeling he hoped for, the sense of truth, never appeared. Word of his search spread farther than he expected. In some regions, families tried to prove their daughters' nobility through documents and declarations. In others, they relied on stories, insisting that their bloodlines were pure and ancient. A few lands even presented young women who claimed princesshood through lost ancestry or forgotten records. But the prince, though patient, felt the hollowness behind the grand displays. It seemed that the louder someone insisted on being a princess, the less convincing the claim felt. As the seasons changed, the prince traveled through forests and across mountains. He visited courts where rulers argued over who deserved his attention, and villages where no one recognized him, but still offered him shelter. He crossed rivers swollen by rain and walked old stone paths cracked by time. He saw sunsets that stained the sky copper and nights lit by stars sharper than jewels. Yet, with every new landscape came the same silent realization. He was no closer to finding a true princess than when he first began. Loneliness followed him like a second shadow. Though he traveled with attendants and guards, the quiet inside him grew heavier. There were nights when he lay awake listening to unfamiliar winds pass through unfamiliar trees, wondering if the idea of a true princess was only a dream created by tradition. Other times he felt anger at the impossible expectations placed upon him. But he said nothing of these thoughts. He continued to search because it was his duty, and because he did not want his parents to worry. In late summer, storms began to shadow his journey. Grey clouds gathered suddenly, as if following him from one kingdom to the next. Rain soaked the roads, turning them to mud. Strong winds clawed at banners hanging over castle gates. The prince pressed on, though each storm seemed to drain a little more of his hope. He began to understand that duty could carry a person far, but not always toward what the heart desired. By autumn, he had visited every kingdom his advisors had listed, and several beyond them. People whispered that the prince was too particular, too cautious, or too lost in his own ideals. But the prince did not judge harshly, nor did he rush. He simply felt the truth in his heart that none of the princesses he had met were the one he sought. Some were genuine, others less so, but none felt like the answer to his kingdom's longing or to his own. On the final leg of his journey, storms grew more frequent. Rain seemed to fall heavier, nights stretched darker, and the prince's tiredness deepened. Yet even in his weariness, he pressed forward, though hope had thinned to a single fragile thread. He did not wish to return home empty-handed, but he also could not accept anything false or forced. Tradition demanded a true princess, but the world offered only uncertainty. Eventually, the prince began the long road back to his kingdom. The forests were colder now, the winds sharper, and the skies darker. The journey home felt different, not like a return with answers, but a return with questions he did not know how to face. The realm he had left behind was waiting for him, expecting change, expecting news, expecting promise. As he approached the borders of his homeland, the first raindrops of a growing storm touched his cloak. The clouds above churned with heavy shadows, and thunder pressed through the air like a distant warning. It was as if the world itself sensed the prince's doubt and responded with the beginning of a night that would change everything. For beyond the storm, something unexpected was already moving towards the castle. Something that would soon shift the course of the prince's journey in ways he could not yet imagine. The storm arrived with almost no warning, rolling across the kingdom with a weight that seemed too heavy for the sky to hold. Clouds poured over the hills like dark, restless waves, and the wind rose sharp enough to bend the tallest branches. By the time night settled, the rain had thickened into a steady roar that blurred the edges of the world. The castle lights flickered against the storm's fury, their warm glow swallowed again and again by sweeping curtains of water. It was the kind of night people remembered, a night that made them gather close to their hearths and speak softly, as if fearing the storm might hear them. Far from the castle, on a muddy road that wound through the countryside, a young woman fought her way through the violent weather. Each step was soaked in cold water. Her clothes, once fine and carefully kept, clung to her body with the weight of the rain. The delicate stitching at her sleeves, the last small sign of the life she had once belonged to, but had loosened and begun to pull apart. Her shoes, softened by days of constant walking, no longer shielded her from the stones and puddles beneath them. She pressed forward anyway, driven by exhaustion and a quiet determination that had carried her much farther than she ever expected to go. Before this storm, her journey had begun with sunlight, warm breezes, and a plan that felt fragile but hopeful. She had set out from a distant land where her family's title, once honored, had become uncertain after political shifts that stripped their privileges and scattered their allies. What remained of their name was delicate, little more than memory and whispered tradition. But titles and borders changed quickly in the world beyond the kingdom's boundaries. And the young woman soon learned how easily a person could lose everything that once defined them. At first, she traveled with a small escort that served her family for years. They carried what little they could and promised to help her reach safety. Yet as the journey stretched over weeks, troubles rose behind them, accusations, disputes, and hostile forces seeking control of the lands they had fled. One by one, their escort dwindled. Some left to protect loved ones, others took different roads in hopes of misdirecting danger. Eventually, only one remained, an older companion who stayed loyal until illness took him during a cold night in early autumn. She buried him beneath a cluster of trees, marking the place with stones gathered from a nearby stream. From that moment on, she traveled alone. The young woman walked through quiet villages where people eyed strangers with caution, through forests where the wind carried strange calls at night, and across plains where the horizon seemed always to be too far away. She felt her past slipping from her, piece by piece, as the journey stretched on. Her last purse of coins went to food, shelter, and a worn map that tore along its creases. Her animals were sold when she could no longer feed them. Her fine cloak was traded for a heavier, simpler one when winter threatened early. And the trinkets she once carried, symbols of her old life, were left behind in small towns where their worth meant more to others than to her future. By the time she entered the kingdom ruled by the aging king and queen, she was no longer outwardly recognizable as anything but a traveler, a stranger carrying only a pack, a faint memory of her family's history, and a growing uncertainty about where she belonged. When the storm broke over her, she had already been walking for many hours without shelter. The sky darkened to an almost unnatural shade, and the first crack of thunder rolled across the land with enough force to make her stop in her tracks. She looked up as the rain began, thick and urgent, as if the clouds had torn open. The wind followed soon after, pushing against her with strong, uneven gusts. She stumbled but continued moving. She kept her head down, letting the rain wash over her, soaking her hair until it clung heavily to her neck. The storm flattened any remaining traces of her old appearance. Her clothes lost their shape, her shoes soaked through, and her carefully braided hair unraveled into long, dripping strands. Even her voice, hoarse from days of calling out in hopes of finding others on the road, would have revealed nothing noble or refined. By the time she reached the castle's outskirts, she had become someone the world no longer recognized. Not a princess, not a lady of high birth, not even a guest with credentials, but simply a figure caught in a storm, too strong to bear alone. The castle gates loomed through the sheets of rain like a distant fortress in a half-remembered dream. Torches flickered along the stone walls, their flames nearly drowned by the relentless wind. The young woman hesitated before approaching, unsure of how she would be received. Rumors had reached her about this kingdom, that it was peaceful, that its rulers were kind, and that its prince traveled seeking something few could describe. But rumors were often fragile and distorted, like reflections broken by water. Still, she needed shelter. So she stepped forward, her feet sinking into the mud as she pushed herself toward the gate. The guards saw her first, standing hunched against the storm. They exchanged glances, curiosity, caution, and a hint of sympathy, before calling for a servant to fetch the queen. It was customary in the kingdom for the queen to be alerted when unexpected travelers appeared during storms, for she believed strongly in offering protection to those in need. Even in her age, she remained attentive to such matters, insisting that a ruler must never turn away someone seeking help on a night like this. The queen arrived shortly after, her cloak shielding her from the rain as she stepped closer to the gate. She studied the young woman carefully. At first glance, the figure before her appeared to be nothing more than a drenched traveler, trembling in the cold and barely able to lift her head. But the queen, with a lifetime of experience and a keen instinct for details, noticed small things others overlooked. The way the young woman stood, even exhausted, suggested a posture taught, not naturally born. The frayed hem of her dress had once been crafted with skill, and her eyes, though tired, held a quiet steadiness that did not match the image of someone who had lived entirely in hardship. Yet nothing was certain. The storm had washed away anything that could easily reveal the truth. The queen ordered that the young woman be brought inside. Servants hurried to assist her, guiding her through the heavy doors, where light and warmth spilled across the stone floors. As the young woman crossed the threshold, the castle walls seemed to hum faintly with the storm outside, as if sensing the shift her arrival would bring. Within the castle, whispers soon spread about the stranger rescued from the storm. Some assumed she was a traveler with nowhere else to go. Others wondered if she carried secrets. A few, remembering the prince's long and fruitless search, quietly speculated about possibilities too far-fetched to voice. The queen remained silent about her suspicions, saying only that the young woman should be given food, dry clothes, and a place to rest for the night. Yet, as she walked back through the hallways of the castle, she felt the stir of something she had not felt in a long time. A sense that the storm had brought more than rain. Outside, thunder rumbled low in the distance. And inside, the young woman, still shivering from the cold, had no way of knowing that this single night would become the turning point of her long journey, or that her arrival had awakened an old question within the castle, one that would soon lead to a quiet test prepared in silence. The storm did not ease as night deepened. The castle walls shuddered softly beneath the wind, and rain tapped endlessly against the tall windows like 1,000 restless fingers. Servants hurried through the halls, tending to dripping cloaks, lighting extra lamps, and preparing warm broth for the unexpected visitor. But even as the castle remained busy, there was a hush over everything, a sense that something delicate had entered their world and must be handled with care. The queen moved quietly through the corridors, her thoughts weaving through the events of the evening. She had seen visitors arrive on stormy nights before, lost travelers, merchants delayed by weather, even diplomats caught off guard by the sudden shift of the skies. But none had carried the same subtle impression as the young woman now resting near the hearth in one of the smaller chambers. There was something fragile about her, something noble that had been worn down but not erased. Yet the queen was careful not to allow hope to rise too quickly. Hope, she knew, could cloud the mind as easily as a heavy fog. For years, she had watched her son struggle under the weight of expectations. She had seen him return from his long travels, tired and changed, carrying disappointment like a shadow that had followed him across kingdoms. She worried for him, not only because the kingdom needed a future, but because he needed something true, someone whose heart would not bend beneath the pressures of royal life, someone who belonged not by appearance, but by nature. It was this worry that shaped her thinking now. As she reached the far end of the corridor, she paused by a window and watched the storm rage over the courtyard. Lightning flashed, illuminating the stones slick with water. She thought of the young woman, drenched and trembling, barely able to stand, yet still holding a posture that spoke of a different past. She thought of the kingdom, the people who depended on stability. She thought of the delicate balance between acting too quickly and waiting too long. And then she thought of the old test. The Queen did not see the test as trickery. Its purpose was not to embarrass or deceive. Instead, it measured something subtle: sensitivity, awareness, the ability to feel what others glossed over. It was said that a true princess, raised with gentleness and refinement, carried a sensitivity not easily dulled by hardship, not sensitivity in the sense of fragility, but in the sense of perception, the ability to notice what lay hidden beneath layers, whether those layers were mattresses or human words. The Queen believed in this kind of sensitivity. She had lived long enough to see how it shaped a person's decisions, how it affected leadership, how it determined the difference between kindness and cruelty. If the young woman possessed it, then perhaps she was someone who could stand beside the prince, not because of lineage, but because of truth. So, with quiet steps and steady breath, the Queen made her way toward the guest chambers to oversee preparations. The servants did not ask questions when she instructed them to gather every mattress stored in the castle. They had heard whispers of the test over the years, though none had witnessed it in their lifetime. They simply obeyed, moving through the halls with arms full of bedding. Mattresses of all kinds were brought out, ones stuffed with feathers, others with wool, and some older ones flattened by years of use. They carried them gently, careful not to let the storm's draught snuff out the lamps. The Queen oversaw the work in silence. She watched as they carried in mattress after mattress, stacking them carefully on top of each other, until the bed grew tall enough that a step stool had to be placed beside it. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, and the glow of the candles softened the edges of the tall stack, making it look almost dreamlike. When the servants finished their work, the Queen dismissed them with a quiet nod. She waited until the room fell still. Outside, thunder rumbled low, turning the air heavy with anticipation. Only when she was alone did the Queen reach into the small pocket of her gown and take out a single green pea. It was small enough to be overlooked, yet firm enough to feel under her fingers. She held it for a moment, thinking again of her son, of the kingdom, of the quiet visitor who carried so much exhaustion in her eyes. Then she knelt and placed the pea beneath the very bottom mattress, ensuring it lay flat against the wooden slats of the bed frame. With the test set, she stepped back and studied the room. The stack of mattresses rose like a tower, soft and inviting, completely ordinary to anyone who did not know what lay hidden beneath. The Queen allowed herself a long, slow breath. She did not know what the outcome would be, but she believed the night itself would reveal something important. When everything was ready, she instructed the servants to bring the young woman to her room. The girl, still weak from the storm, followed quietly. She wore a simple nightgown borrowed from the castle stores, and her hair had been loosely dried by the fire's heat. But there was a heaviness in her steps, the exhaustion of many nights spent without comfort. She thanked the servants softly as they guided her into the chamber, her eyes drifting to the towering bed with a look of surprise and confusion. But she did not question it. She was too tired, too overwhelmed by the events of the night. The servants helped her climb onto the bed, arranging blankets around her and wishing her a restful night. When they left, the room grew still again, woven with candlelight and distant thunder. The young woman lay on her back, staring up at the canopy, listening to the faint hum of the storm. She did not know of the test beneath her. How could she? Her thoughts were filled with memories of the road behind her, the faces she lost, the nights spent under open skies, the long silence of traveling alone. She was grateful for warmth, for a roof overhead, for even a few hours of rest. Yet her body ached from exhaustion, and no amount of fine linen could erase the pain of long hardship. But as the minutes passed, the discomfort began. At first, she shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. She thought the ache came from her tired muscles. But then the feeling sharpened. A small, persistent pressure beneath the layers of softness. It was almost absurd, like a tiny stone placed under a mountain of blankets. But it was real. She turned onto her side, then onto her back again. But the pressure followed, always present, always unsettling. The hours stretched slowly. The storm continued outside, its rhythm steady and fierce. But the greater battle was the one happening within the high bed. The young woman could not rest. Her fatigue grew heavier with every passing moment, yet sleep would not come. Every shift brought a new wave of discomfort, subtle but unmistakable. And beneath that physical unease lay another feeling, a memory of vulnerability, of nights spent on rocky ground or sagging beds in unfamiliar inns. The Pea awakened not only her senses, but also the emotions she had tried so hard to quiet. Near midnight, she sat up briefly, pressing her hands to her face. She felt tears behind her eyes, but did not let them fall. She lay down again, curling into herself, willing the discomfort to fade, but it did not. The storm outside finally began to weaken, but the struggle within the room lasted until dawn. The young woman did not sleep. Her exhaustion deepened into a sharp ache that filled her entire body, leaving her drained and fragile. When the first light touched the windows, pale and soft, she lay quietly beneath the blankets, unsure of how she would face the morning, but knowing, without understanding why, that the night had changed something. And elsewhere in the castle, the queen rose early, the memory of the test still fresh in her mind, sensing that the day would reveal truths long awaited. The night stretched on without mercy, long after the storm had softened into a gentle rain. The castle rested in a rare quiet, the kind that only followed a night of thunder, an almost breathless calm, as if the world itself needed time to recover. Lamps flickered behind thick curtains, and the occasional footstep echoed faintly in distant hallways. But in the high bed of the guest chamber, the young woman lay awake, holding her exhaustion like a burden she could not put down. The discomfort began as a mild, strange pressure, the sort that might be ignored in a moment of deep fatigue. But each passing hour sharpened it. She shifted again and again, but the unease followed her no matter how she lay. It pressed through the heavy layers of mattresses with a persistence that seemed impossible, as though some invisible reminder was rising from beneath the softness to insist she could not forget who she was or what she had been through. Her eyes remained open, adjusted to the dim glow of the candles that had burned low through the night. Shadows moved gently across the ceiling as the last of the storm clouds drifted overhead. She tried to draw comfort from the warmth of the blankets, from the dryness of the room, from the safety of having a roof above her and walls around her. But the pressure beneath her seemed to push past all of that, reaching into memory rather than muscle. With every small ache that radiated up her back and down her legs, she thought of places she had slept before, nights on uneven forest ground where tree roots pressed through thin blankets, nights on creaking beds in roadside inns with straw that poked through the fabric, nights near smouldering campfires where the cold seeped into her bones, no matter how close she curled to the heat. Those memories had shaped her sleep into something guarded and light, always interrupted, always fragile. But this night felt different. The discomfort was sharper, as though the bed itself were reminding her of the life she once had and the life she had lost. She closed her eyes, hoping sleep would come if she pretended not to notice the ache. Instead, memories swelled behind her eyelids, rising with a quiet force. She saw her childhood home, not the building itself, but fragments of it, the moments that had shaped her more deeply than she realized. She remembered the soft carpets of the hallways where she once played without worry. She remembered the gardens where she learned the names of flowers and traced the patterns of their petals with curious fingers. She remembered the way her mother spoke with a voice that carried grace in every word, and the way her father walked with careful dignity. She remembered the security of knowing who she was. But she also remembered the day that security cracked. The day news arrived that their family's place among the nobility was being challenged. The quiet conversations behind closed doors, the hurried packing, the dimming of the house as servants left to protect themselves. She remembered the way her parents tried to stay calm, though the fear in their eyes betrayed them. She remembered making the choice to leave for safety, believing she might one day return. Now, in the stillness of the unfamiliar room, she realized how heavy those memories had become. The ache beneath her body seemed to reach upward, like a thread tying her to everything she had endured, everything she had lost, and everything she still carried. Her breath trembled as she exhaled. The discomfort intensified, spreading into her ribs and up her spine, until it felt as though the many mattresses were not a barrier at all. She shifted again, curling on her side, but the ache pressed back with the same stubbornness. A quiet sound escaped her, a soft, weary sigh that dissolved into the dimness. She did not want to cry. She had cried enough on the road. Instead, she let the memories wash through her, sharp and gentle at the same time. The castle around her slept peacefully, unaware of the storm she carried inwardly. Somewhere far down the corridor, a guard's footsteps echoed like a distant heartbeat. Elsewhere, a servant turned in their sleep, the rustling of blankets barely audible. The world continued without knowing she had not slept at all, without knowing how deeply she felt the night. Hours passed, the candles thinned, their flames small but steady. She watched them flicker, grateful for the light, even though it made the room feel more lonely. She thought of the people she had met on her travels: kind strangers, wary villagers, merchants with quick smiles, mothers carrying their children across uncertain roads. She wondered where they were now. She wondered how many of them slept better than she did tonight. She thought of the companion she had buried under the trees, the friend who had insisted she keep moving forward, even as illness stole his strength. She imagined him telling her now to stay calm. That discomfort was temporary. That morning would bring clarity. But the night felt endless, and the ache beneath her felt too sharp to ignore. Still, she did not move from the bed. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go, and because part of her understood that this night, this strange, sleepless night, mattered in some way she could not yet explain. Her thoughts drifted to the Queen who had met her at the gates. There had been a depth in the Queen's gaze, a quiet understanding that made the young woman feel seen even in her worst condition. She wondered what the Queen expected of her. She wondered if she had already failed by being nothing more than a drenched stranger with a hollow past. The discomfort deepened again, a small surge of pain that pulsed beneath her. She pressed her hand lightly against her ribs, trying to steady her breath. It was not the pain itself that frightened her, but the memories it stirred, the years of trying to keep her identity hidden, the guilt of surviving when her family had not been able to stay together, the uncertainty of whether she had any right to seek safety in a kingdom that did not know her name. But she also thought of the strength it had taken to reach the castle at all, the courage it required to walk through rain and wind, to carry on when so much had already been lost. She realized then that the discomfort was not simply something that kept her from sleep. It was something that revealed the depth of what she had carried within her all this time. As the sky slowly lightened, turning from black to deep blue, she felt her body aching in every limb. She had not slept a moment, not even drifted. And yet, there was something steady within her, a quiet endurance that had survived the night. She lay there, watching the soft glow of early dawn filter into the room, knowing that the night had shown a truth she had not expected, that even after all she had endured, she had not grown numb. She still felt everything. The gentlest discomfort could reach her, could wake her, could stir her memories into vivid life. And somewhere else in the castle, the Queen was preparing to learn what the night had revealed, though neither of them yet knew how the morning would unfold, or how these quiet hours would shape the kingdom's future. The sun rose slowly, touching the edges of the clouds that remained from the storm. The young woman waited in silence, aching, hopeful, uncertain, and unaware that the next part of her journey was about to begin. Morning came slowly, as if even the sun hesitated to disturb the stillness of the night that had stretched so endlessly inside the castle walls. The light crept across the sky in thin layers of gold, touching the highest towers first, then the windows of the upper halls, and finally the courtyard stones that still held the memory of last night's rain. Everything felt washed clean, though the air carried a quiet tension, as though the building itself sensed that something delicate and irreversible had taken place during the long hours of darkness. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, soft and trembling, waiting for whatever truth morning light would reveal. The bedchamber where the princess lay was filled with this early brightness, though she barely noticed. She had not slept beyond scattered moments of drifting and waking, each time startled by discomfort that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The pea beneath the many mattresses had pressed into her in strange, impossible ways, but even that was only part of the night's burden. What truly kept her awake were the memories rising, like unwelcome ghosts, each one shaped by the places she had left behind and the lives she had brushed against in her journey. She felt as though all of them had climbed into the towering bed with her, tugging at her thoughts, reminding her of every mile walked, every loss carried, every moment of doubt that had ever slowed her steps. When the first strong beam of sunlight reached her eyes, she let out a long, unsteady breath. Her body ached as if it had spent the night being pressed by the weight of the world, and she wondered if this was what the Queen had intended, or if this pain was simply another remnant of the life she had lived before arriving at the castle gates. It was hard to separate the two. Everything inside her felt tangled, past and present, hope and hesitation, identity and uncertainty. The quiet footsteps in the hallway told her the castle was awakening. Servants moved carefully, their whispers soft enough to respect the fragile quiet of early morning, yet purposeful enough to show that the day ahead carried importance. They all knew the Queen had planned something unusual. No one dared speculate openly, but thoughts fluttered through the halls like invisible birds. The stranger who had arrived in the storm, the bed prepared with more layers than any guest had ever been offered, the unspoken possibility that she might be someone significant. The castle felt as though it hovered on the edge of discovery. The Queen herself was already awake, though she had slept only a little more than the princess. Her own night had been filled with worry, not for the test she had devised, but for the responsibility that lay beneath it. She knew that the future of the kingdom depended on the choice she and her son would make, and she understood the weight of choosing wrong. When she placed the pea beneath the mattresses the night before, she had not done so with malice or delight. She had done it with the solemn acceptance that every decision of importance required more than trust. It required clarity. Yet, as she walked toward the guest chamber that morning, she felt no triumph, only a steady, measured readiness to face whatever truth the night had shaped. The door was opened gently. Light spilled inside, brightening the pale exhaustion on the princess's face. The Queen observed her with a calm, almost tender gaze. She saw the dark circles beneath her eyes, the stiffness in her posture, the faint tremble in her hands. These were not signs of weakness, but of endurance. No ordinary traveler would show such sensitivity after a night on a soft, towering bed. No ordinary traveler would look as though sleep had been an almost impossible task. And though the Queen had wanted evidence, she had not expected the depth of it. The prince stood just behind her, his expression unsure and hopeful all at once. He had risen early, unable to lie still while wondering what the night had revealed. Now Seeing the young woman sitting upright in the overly grand, overly cushioned bed, he felt something shift inside him, something like recognition, though he could not name its shape. He remembered the emptiness he had felt during his long search, the hollow weight of meeting princesses who seemed carved from ceremony rather than truth. Yet here, before him, sat someone whose presence carried the quiet gravity of lived experience. She looked fragile, yet the fragility held strength, as though she had weathered more storms than she could count, and still found the will to keep going. The queen spoke softly, asking how she had slept. The princess answered with honesty, describing the restless night, the sharp discomfort, and the strange sensation of something small yet persistent beneath her. She did not embellish. She did not complain. She simply spoke the truth, and the truth was enough. The queen exchanged a subtle glance with her son, one that held the weight of realization. The test had revealed what she feared and hoped in equal measure. The young woman was no common traveler. She carried sensitivity not as frailty, but as evidence of a life shaped by the subtle details most people never noticed. Yet even with the truth revealed, certainty did not arrive all at once. The princess felt it too. The castle was safe, warm, and generous, but it was not home. The people here were strangers, and the prince, though sincere in his expression, remained someone she barely knew. The night had tested her, yes, but the morning asked a different question. After all she had lost, after all she had endured, did she want to begin again here? Breakfast was quiet and thoughtful. The queen observed the princess's gentle manners, her careful movements, her watchfulness. The prince found himself drawn to her steadiness, the way she held herself despite exhaustion, the soft strength in her voice. He felt hope stirring in him, slow and uncertain, but genuine, as if a seed long dormant had finally touched sunlight. Yet he did not rush. He sensed that she needed time, that the story unfolding between them could not be forced into a shape too quickly. The day passed with the castle adjusting itself to the possibility of her staying. Servants prepared rooms, though nothing was decided. Advisers whispered, though no announcements were made. The queen carried the pea to her private chamber, setting it aside as a reminder of what small things could reveal. The prince found himself walking the gardens more than usual, imagining conversations that had not yet happened. And the princess wandered the halls at a slow pace, letting the quiet beauty of the place settle into her, though she remained unsure of where she belonged. She thought of her lost home, of the people she once knew, of the life that had slipped away from her like a story half forgotten. She thought of the roads she had traveled, the nights spent under open skies, the feeling of holding her identity close, even when the world around her forgot it. The castle offered comfort, but comfort alone was not enough to build a future. She needed trust, safety, and time to understand herself again before she could understand what role she might play here. Evening approached, carrying with it a gentler silence than the storm-filled night before. The prince found her in the courtyard, watching the last of the daylight settle across the rooftops. He approached slowly, not wanting to disturb her peace. The two stood together without words as the sky shifted from gold to soft rose, to the first hints of twilight. It was not a moment of grand declarations or sudden decisions. It was simply a moment of understanding that the future was not something to be seized instantly, but something to be shaped with patience. The princess did not promise to stay, but she did not express a desire to leave either. Instead, she allowed herself to breathe, to rest, to imagine a life where she might belong again, not by force, not by expectation, but by choice. And the prince, sensing this quiet possibility, let hope settle into him like morning light returning after a long, uncertain night. The kingdom did not transform overnight. There were no celebrations yet, no proclamations of marriage or legacy. What the morning had revealed was not a fairy tale ending, but the beginning of something fragile and real. Identity would take time to rebuild. Belonging would grow slowly, like roots finding their way through new soil. And love, if it came, would come not through tests or tradition, but through the shared experience of healing and discovering what the future could be. The pea remained carefully stored, an object no longer of challenge, but of remembrance, a reminder that even the smallest things could reveal great truths, and that even a single night could change the direction of many lives. The queen kept it close, not as proof, but as memory. The prince kept his hopes quiet, letting them grow naturally, and the princess kept her heart open, just enough to allow a first gentle possibilities of staying. As night settled over the kingdom once more, the castle glowed softly from within, its halls warmed by the slow, steady breath of a place learning to welcome someone new. The future remained uncertain, but no longer frightening. It held room for growth, for healing, for choosing each step with intention rather than duty. And in that quiet space, between what had been and what might be, the princess and the prince began the slow, tender work of shaping a life not defined by storms or tests, but by the gentle courage of beginning again.